The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of alien architecture. A vast dome made of shimmering crystal and pulsating lights. Delegates from hundreds of species sat in curved tiers, their bioluminescent skin, scales, or fur casting a surreal glow across the hall. In the center stood Princess Zarya of the Tselthan Empire, her tall, slender frame wrapped in flowing silver robes. Her iridescent violet eyes scanned the crowd as she stood calmly before the council's podium. High Chancellor Vork, a reptilian being with jade-green scales and golden eyes, leaned forward. His forked tongue flicked out as he spoke. Princess Zarya of the Tselthan Empire, you are requesting an official escort to the Peace Summit at the Velaran Spire. Your request has been approved. The Tselthan Royal Fleet will provide the most advanced warship in the galaxy for your protection. Zarya's gaze remained steady. I decline the Tselthan Fleet's offer. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. Chancellor Vork's golden eyes narrowed. Then what ship would you prefer, Your Highness? Zarya raised her chin slightly. A human ship. The hall fell into stunned silence. Beings of all shapes and forms exchanged shocked glances. A deep, guttural laugh erupted from the far side of the chamber. A massive figure, covered in dark red scales, rose from his seat. General Korvik of the Draconis Collective sneered. A human ship? Are you mad? The humans' technology is primitive. Their ships are barely held together with scrap metal. Zarya's expression remained calm, but her eyes glinted with steel. I know what I am asking. High Chancellor Vork's tongue flicked nervously. Forgive me, Princess, but why would you trust humans? The Tselthan Empire has fleets equipped with quantum shielding and hyperskip technology. The humans have lasers and steel. Zarya's gaze hardened. Human technology may be crude, but humans are not weak. When the Velaran Syndicate attacked the Nithar colonies last year, it was not the Tselthan fleet that stood in defense of the helpless. It was the Terran Union. A single Terran battleship held off an entire Velaran armada for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. Humanity's strength does not come from their technology. It comes from their will to survive. Chancellor Vork opened his mouth to speak, but Zarya cut him off. I will travel with the humans. That is my final decision. The Chancellor's scales rippled with irritation. Very well, Princess Zarya. Your request is highly irregular. However, the Council will comply. 2 days later, Captain Jake Hunter stood at the docking bay of the Terran warship Iron Fang. His dark brown hair was cropped close to his head, and his sharp green eyes studied the massive Tselthan vessel approaching through the station's reinforced glass. He had heard the rumors. The Tselthan princess had specifically requested a human ship for her transport, a request so absurd that even his superior officers seemed confused. Captain. A young officer approached, her crisp blue uniform a stark contrast against the dark metal of the station. Princess Zarya's shuttle is arriving. Jake adjusted the collar of his black uniform and sighed. Of course it is. The shuttle settled gently onto the landing pad. A hiss of steam followed as the boarding ramp lowered. 2 Tselthan guards in gleaming silver armor stepped out first, their reptilian heads swiveling to scan the perimeter. Then she appeared. Princess Zarya descended the ramp with smooth, unhurried grace. Her long white hair cascaded down her back, reflecting the docking bay's artificial light. Her silver robes flowed like liquid metal as she walked toward Jake. Her violet eyes locked on his, assessing him with a calm intensity that made his shoulders stiffen. Captain Jake Hunter, Zarya said, her voice smooth and clear. Jake gave a curt nod. Princess Zarya, welcome aboard the Iron Fang. She tilted her head slightly. It is smaller than I expected. Jake's brow twitched. And yet, it'll keep you alive. Zarya's eyes glinted. We shall see. Jake gestured toward the ship's interior. Shall we? The princess glided past him, her guards following silently. Jake fell into step beside her as they moved through the narrow metal corridors of the ship. Zarya's gaze slid over the dark gray walls and exposed piping. The ship was not beautiful, no polished gold or gleaming silver, but it was functional, efficient. Human ships were built for war, not comfort. Jake led her to the bridge. The room hummed with quiet activity as human officers monitored various systems. Zarya's eyes settled on the central tactical display, a large hologram showing their flight path to the Valoran Spire. "You have limited weapon systems," Zarya observed. "No plasma shielding." Jake's lips curled into a faint smile. "No, but we make up for it with other tricks." Zarya's gaze sharpened. "Such as?" Jake's smile widened. "Let's just say, human ships don't play fair." Zarya's expression remained neutral, but the corner of her mouth twitched as if fighting a smile. "I hope your tricks are enough." Jake's eyes darkened. "So do I." The Iron Fang disengaged from the docking bay with a low rumble. Through the viewport, the stars stretched and blurred as the ship's hyperdrive activated. Zarya stood at the window, her gaze fixed on the endless black beyond. "Why us?" Jake asked. Zarya didn't turn. "Because you don't think like them." "Who?" Zarya's violet eyes met his. "Everyone else." Jake's jaw tightened. He didn't know what game Zarya was playing, but he had the feeling it was bigger than just a simple transport mission. He had faced Valoran warships and rogue AI fleets, but something about Zarya's calm certainty unsettled him. "Captain," the comms officer said, "an unknown vessel is approaching at high speed. No identification codes." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Put it on screen." A ghostly shape flickered into view. Dark metal, and shifting patterns of light. It was massive, at least twice the size of the Iron Fang, and heavily armed. "That's not a Selthan ship," Jake said quietly. Zarya's expression hardened. "No, it's Draconis." Jake's hand hovered over the alert switch. "Looks like someone doesn't want you to make it to the summit." Zarya stepped toward him. "I trust you, Captain." Jake's hand slammed down on the alarm. "All hands to battle stations." The bridge erupted into action as klaxons blared through the ship. Jake's green eyes locked onto Zarya's. "You still sure you picked the right ship?" Zarya's gaze didn't waver. "Absolutely." Jake grinned. "Good. Let's show them how humans fight." The Iron Fang shook violently as the Draconis warship fired its first volley. The lights on the bridge dimmed for a split second before emergency power kicked in. Red warning lights flashed across the walls as Jake Hunter gripped the edge of his command console, steadying himself. His green eyes flashed toward the tactical display. The Draconis ship was closing fast, weapons charged, and targeting systems locked onto them. "Shields holding at 65%, the tactical officer shouted. Jake's jaw tightened. "Fire back. Target their weapon systems." The ship's cannons roared to life, sending streaks of crimson light slicing through the void toward the enemy vessel. The Draconis ship's shields flared with pale blue light as the energy blast struck, but the massive warship didn't even slow down. A second later, it returned fire. Dark energy pulses hammered into the Iron Fang's hull, causing another violent tremor. Sparks burst from the ceiling as conduits overloaded. "Shields down to 40%. Jake slammed his fist onto the console. "Damn it. Reroute power from non-essential systems to shields." "Helm. Evasive maneuvers." "Aye, Captain." The Iron Fang rolled sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding another barrage of dark energy. The viewport showed the Draconis ship looming ahead, a jagged silhouette of black and crimson, like a predator circling its prey. Jake's eyes narrowed. "They're not trying to destroy us." Zarya stepped toward him, her silver robes shimmering under the flickering light. "They're trying to disable the ship." Jake's gaze sharpened. "They want you alive." A deep growl resonated through the bridge's speakers. A communication request. Jake's fingers hovered over the console. He shot Zarya a look. "Any idea who it might be?" Her violet eyes darkened. "Open the channel." Jake pressed the button. A massive figure appeared on the holoscreen. General Korvac. His red scales glistened under dim light, and his slit pupil eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. Princess Zarya, Korvac purred. It's rare for a Selthan royal to travel without proper escort. But then again, you've always been reckless. Zarya's expression was steel. Korvac. Korvac's fanged mouth curled into a sinister smile. The Selthan Empire has been soft for centuries. Allying yourselves with the humans only proves how desperate you've become. Enough games, Jake growled. What do you want? Korvac's eyes narrowed. Simple. The princess surrenders, and I allow the rest of you to live. Resist, and I strip the flesh from your bones. Jake's eyes flashed with defiance. Not happening. Korvac's smile widened. So predictable. The channel cut out. Immediately, the Draconish ship unleashed another volley. The iron fangs spun violently as explosions ripped across its hull. Shields at 20%. The tactical officer shouted. Captain, the comms officer called out. They're launching boarding craft. Jake cursed under his breath. His mind raced. They couldn't hold off the Draconish ship for long, not with their shields nearly gone. And now, they were about to be boarded. Zarya's calm voice cut through the chaos. Captain Hunter, how long can your ship's cloaking device hold? Jake's gaze snapped toward her. 5 minutes. Maybe less. Enough time to outmaneuver them. Jake's mouth twisted into a hard smile. Only one way to find out. Activate the cloak, Zarya ordered. With all due respect, Princess, Jake said, I'm the one giving orders here. Zarya's eyes glinted. Then order the cloak, Captain. Jake hesitated for a second, then slammed his hand on the console. Engage cloak. The hum of the ship's engines changed as the Iron Fang's hull shimmered and vanished from view. The Draconish ship fired blindly into the void, their shots missing wildly. Now what? Jake asked. Zarya's expression remained cool. We strike. Jake's eyes flashed. You're insane. That's a Draconish dreadnought. Twice our size. 5 times our firepower. And yet you humans have a saying, don't you? Zarya's lips curled slightly. Fight dirty. Jake's eyes darkened. Oh, I like you. He turned to the helm. Pilot, take us in close, right beneath their main thruster banks. Captain, you heard me. The Iron Fang slipped beneath the Draconish ship, undetectable under the cloak. Jake watched the tactical display, his pulse hammering in his ears. Weapons officer, target their engine array. Captain, that'll drop the cloak. Jake's gaze was ice. Do it. The cloak dissolved in an instant as the Iron Fang's cannons blazed. Plasma bolts ripped through the Draconish dreadnought's thrusters. Flames erupted along the enemy ship's underside. Direct hit. The Draconish ship jolted violently as its thrusters sputtered and failed. Jake's smile was razor-sharp. They're crippled. Now. A metallic shriek tore through the ship's hull. The bridge's lights dimmed as emergency power flickered. They've breached the hull. Jake's eyes widened. Seal the affected sections. A sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridors. Zarya's hand drifted toward her side, and from beneath her silver robes, she drew a small, gleaming dagger. Jake's eyes narrowed. You're not seriously planning to use that. Zarya's violet eyes burned. You'd be surprised how effective it can be. Captain, a voice crackled over the intercom. Draconish warriors have breached Deck 4. Jake's eyes flashed with rage. All security teams, engage and hold the line. Jake drew his own weapon, a compact plasma pistol, and moved toward the exit. Zarya followed him. Stay here, Jake ordered. Zarya's gaze was cold. No. Jake sighed. Great. They moved quickly through the narrow corridors, meeting up with a squad of Terran soldiers already taking cover behind the bulkheads. The sound of heavy footsteps approached. The Draconish warriors were coming. On my mark, Jake whispered. A hulking Draconish soldier turned the corner. dark red scales glinting under the flickering lights. Jake fired. A blue bolt struck the creature's armored chest, barely slowing it down. The creature roared and charged. Jake fired again, but Zarya was faster. She slipped beneath the Draconess arm, her dagger flashing in an arc. The blade sank into the soft joint between the creature's armor. The Draconess warrior howled as it collapsed to the ground. Jake raised his eyebrows. "Remind me never to piss you off." Zarya's expression remained calm. "Keep moving." The corridor erupted with gunfire and plasma bursts as more Draconess warriors appeared. Jake ducked behind a metal crate, firing in controlled bursts. Zarya moved with fluid precision, her dagger finding weak points with deadly accuracy. "Fall back," Jake shouted. "Get to the core." A massive explosion rocked the ship as a plasma grenade detonated nearby. Jake shielded Zarya with his body as the shockwave sent them both crashing to the floor. "Captain," a voice screamed over the comms. They've reached the engine room. Jake's breath heaved as he forced himself to stand. Zarya's hand was already steady on his arm. Her violet eyes locked onto his. Jake's jaw tightened. Time to show them why humans don't give up. Zarya's smile was sharp. "Let's finish this." Jake Hunter paced the bridge of the Iron Fang, his fists clenched at his sides. The ship's hull still groaned from the damage sustained during the last skirmish. But for now, they were safe. The Draconess dreadnought had been crippled, and the boarding party had been repelled. Barely. Sparks still flickered from damaged consoles, and the scent of burnt metal hung heavy in the air. Zarya stood near the viewport, her silver robes flowing around her slender form. Her violet eyes were calm, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. She had fought as fiercely as any of his crew, maybe more. There was no denying her skill, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. "Captain," the damage report, the tactical officer called out. "Shields are down to 15%. Cloaking system offline. Plasma reserves are running low." Jake rubbed a hand over his jaw. "How long until we can restore the cloak?" "At least 6 hours, sir." Jake's jaw tightened. "We don't have 6 hours." A faint hum sounded from behind him as Zarya approached. "We need to find a safe harbor." Jake's eyes narrowed. "I know." He turned toward her. "You mind telling me how they tracked us through the cloak?" Zarya's expression didn't change. "The Draconess have advanced technology." Jake's gaze hardened. "Not that advanced." Zarya's lips tightened. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Jake stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "I'm suggesting someone tipped them off. Someone on this ship." A flicker of emotion passed through Zarya's eyes, something sharp and dangerous, but it was gone in an instant. That would require access to restricted systems. Only your senior officers would have that level of clearance. Jake's eyes narrowed. "Or a passenger with royal diplomatic codes." Zarya's gaze sharpened. "Careful, Captain." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but the comms panel buzzed. "Captain." The comms officer's voice crackled through the static. "Incoming transmission. Priority code." Jake moved to the console and activated the screen. A familiar face appeared. Admiral Reynolds, his weathered face lined with exhaustion. "Jake," Reynolds said, "we've got a situation." "Understatement of the year," Jake muttered. "We just fought off a Draconess dreadnought. They knew exactly where we were." Reynolds's face darkened. "It's worse than that. We've intercepted communications from the Selthan royal court. The Draconess are claiming that the Iron Fang abducted Princess Zarya." Jake's blood ran cold. "That's a lie." Reynolds' gaze was hard. "The Selthan Empire doesn't think so. Their fleet is mobilizing, and they're not coming to rescue you." Jake's chest tightened. "You think they're working with the Draconess, or someone within the royal family is," Reynolds replied grimly. "Jake, you need to get Zarya off that ship. Now." The screen went dark. Jake turned slowly toward Zarya. Her violet eyes gleamed under the dim light. "You don't think?" Jake's gaze sharpened. They set you up. Zarya's face remained calm, but Jake saw the subtle tension in her jaw. It's possible. Who? Jake demanded. A soft hiss echoed from the far side of the bridge. A figure stepped from the shadows. Tall, lean, wrapped in black armor. Pale blue eyes glinted beneath the helmet. That, Zarya said quietly, would be my brother. Jake's hand went to his sidearm as the figure stepped forward, removing his helmet. Silver hair framed a cruel, handsome face, cold and calculating. Zalvar, Zarya whispered. Hello, sister. Zalvar's smile was thin. It's been too long. Jake's gun was already raised. How the hell did you get on my ship? Zalvar's pale gaze flicked toward Jake dismissively. I have my ways. He turned toward Zarya. You should have come home when you had the chance. You betrayed us. Zarya's voice was like ice. Zalvar's smile deepened. No, dear sister, I saved us. The Draconess offered us peace in exchange for one thing. Zarya's breath hitched. Me. Zalvar nodded. You always were the valuable one. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. You son of a... Zalvar's eyes flashed. Now. Let's not be hasty. A low rumble vibrated through the ship. Jake's hand shot toward his earpiece. What was that? Captain. The tactical officer's voice came through, panicked. A Draconess vessel just dropped out of FTL. They're targeting us. Jake's eyes flashed toward Zalvar. You led them here. Zalvar's smile sharpened. Indeed. Jake fired. A plasma bolt shot through the air, but Zalvar was already moving. He twisted, and the bolt struck the bulkhead behind him. In a flash of motion, Zalvar's hand shot out, striking Jake's arm and sending his pistol clattering to the floor. Zarya moved with lethal precision. Her dagger flashed toward Zalvar's throat, but he caught her wrist with casual ease. You always were predictable, Zalvar purred. Jake recovered fast. He lunged, driving his fist into Zalvar's side. The blow connected. Zalvar's grip loosened just enough for Zarya to twist free. Zarya's dagger struck. Zalvar moved too late. The blade bit into his side. He hissed, staggering back. A sharp burst of static erupted from the comms. Captain. Draconess ship firing. Impact in 30 seconds. Zalvar's gaze darkened. Checkmate. Jake's fist slammed into Zalvar's jaw. The Xelthan prince crumpled to the floor. Bridge. Jake barked. Prepare for emergency jump. Sir, the drive is still recalibrating. Then override it. Jake's gaze shot toward Zarya. She was already at the navigation console. Her fingers flew across the controls. Coordinates set, Zarya said. Jake grabbed the intercom. All hands. Brace for jump. The Draconess ship loomed closer. The plasma cannons flared, and the Iron Fang blinked out of existence. The ship reappeared in a field of stars. The hum of the engines faltered, then stabilized. Jake exhaled slowly. Zarya's hand drifted toward her side. Crimson stained her silver robes. Jake's eyes widened. You're hit. I'm fine, Zarya said through gritted teeth. Jake's eyes narrowed. Sit down. That's an order. Zarya's gaze softened. You care more than you pretend, Captain. Jake's jaw tightened. I care about keeping my crew alive. A groan sounded from the floor. Zalvar stirred, clutching his side. Jake pointed his gun at the prince's head. One reason I shouldn't shoot you. Zalvar smiled faintly. Because you'll need me before this is over. Jake's gaze darkened. I doubt that. But as he watched Zarya's pale face and the steady rise and fall of her breath, Jake had a sinking feeling that Zalvar was right. Jake Hunter sat in the captain's chair of the Iron Fang, his hand gripping the armrest tightly. The ship's engines hummed beneath his feet, a steady vibration that should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Zarya was seated to his left, her face pale from blood loss. The medics had done what they could to stabilize her, but the cut on her side was deep. A thin sheen of sweat covered her forehead, but her violet eyes remained sharp. "I'm fine," Zarya said, sensing his gaze. Jake's jaw tightened. "You're not." "It's nothing." Zarya's gaze slid toward Zalvar, who sat bound to the metal rail near the back of the bridge. His wrists were shackled with high-frequency energy cuffs, and his silver hair was matted with sweat and blood. He smiled faintly as he met Zarya's gaze. "You look tired, sister," Zalvar said. "Shut up," Jake growled. Zalvar's pale blue eyes gleamed. "I don't think you understand the situation, Captain. The Draconis fleet knows where you are. You may have jumped to safety for now, but you can't hide forever." Jake stalked toward Zalvar, his eyes cold. "You gave them our position." Zalvar's smile didn't falter. "Of course." Jake's hand shot out, grabbing Zalvar's collar and dragging him to his feet. "Why?" Zalvar's smile sharpened. "Because you're holding the most valuable person in the galaxy." Jake's gaze darkened. "Your sister." "No." Zalvar's eyes glinted dangerously. "The heir to the Selthan Empire." Zarya's breath hitched. "That's a lie." Zalvar's smile deepened. "Is it?" Jake's grip tightened. "You expect us to believe this?" "I expect you to understand what happens next," Zalvar replied coolly. "The Draconis will come for her. And when they do, you won't be able to stop them." Jake's fist connected with Zalvar's jaw. The prince crumpled to the floor, coughing. Jake turned toward Zarya, his chest heaving. "He's stalling," Jake said. "Yes," Zarya agreed. Jake's eyes narrowed. "Why?" The ship's alarm blared suddenly. The tactical officer's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, a Draconis battleship just entered the system." Jake's heart hammered. "How close?" "Close enough to lock weapons." Jake's gaze flashed toward Zalvar, who was grinning through the blood on his lips. "Told you," Zalvar said. Jake turned toward the navigation console. "Can we jump?" "Hyperdrive is still recalibrating," Zarya said, her fingers flying over the controls. "We need more time." Jake's eyes darkened. "We don't have time." A deep vibration shook the ship as the Draconis vessel powered up its main cannon. A red glow pulsed through the viewport, growing brighter with each second. "They're charging a plasma beam," the tactical officer shouted. 30 seconds until impact." Jake's mind raced. There was no way they could survive a direct hit from a Draconis plasma cannon, not with their shields already down to 15%. His gaze shot toward Zarya. "You have diplomatic codes, right?" Zarya's eyes narrowed. "Yes." "Can you use them to override their targeting systems?" Zarya's lips parted. Maybe." Jake stalked toward Zalvar and grabbed him by the collar. "Your codes. Now." Zalvar smiled faintly. "What's in it for me?" Jake's gun pressed into Zalvar's throat. "Your life." Zalvar's smile didn't waver. "Ah. Well, since you put it so nicely." He rattled off a string of codes. Zarya's fingers blurred over the controls. "Processing." Jake's gaze hardened. 10 seconds. The red glow from the plasma cannon filled the viewport. 5 seconds. Jake's jaw clenched. "Come on." Zarya's eyes flashed. "Got it." The red glow vanished. The Draconis ship veered to the left. Its targeting system scrambled. The plasma cannon fired, but the shot went wide, missing the Iron Fang by meters. Jake exhaled sharply. "Now, fire." The Iron Fang's cannons erupted. Blue-white plasma tore through the Draconis ship's flank. The enemy vessel shuddered violently as secondary explosions erupted along its hull. "Direct hit," the tactical officer shouted. Jake's eyes burned with cold fury. Again. The cannons fired again. The Draconis ship's hull split apart. Flames and debris scattered into the void. Jake's chest heaved. "Status." "The Draconis vessel is disabled." The tactical officer replied. "They're not going anywhere." Jake's gaze flicked toward Zarya. Her eyes gleamed beneath the dim lights. "Nice work, Princess." Zarya's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're welcome." Zalvar's voice came from the floor. "Impressive." Jake turned toward him. "You've got about 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't toss you out the airlock." Zalvar's smile remained calm. "Because you need me." Jake's gun pressed against Zalvar's temple. "Wrong answer." Zalvar's eyes sharpened. "The Draconis will send more. And next time, they'll bring reinforcements." Jake's hand tightened on the grip. "You think this is over?" Zalvar's smile sharpened. "It's just beginning." Jake's finger hovered over the trigger, but Zarya's hand settled on his arm. "Jake." Jake's gaze flicked toward her. Zarya's eyes were calm. "Steady." "He's right." Jake's jaw clenched. Slowly, he lowered the gun. "Fine, but you're staying in the brig." Zalvar's eyes glinted. "Fair enough." Jake turned toward Zarya. "How long until the hyperdrive recalibrates?" 15 minutes, Zarya replied. Jake nodded. "Good." The comms crackled. "Captain, we're picking up multiple jump signatures. Looks like more Draconis ships inbound." Jake's gaze darkened. "How many?" "At least 4. Jake's jaw tightened. "Bring the weapons online. Prepare for close quarters combat." Zarya's eyes narrowed. "You're not thinking of fighting them, are you? Unless you have a better idea." Zarya's gaze sharpened. As a matter of fact, her fingers moved across the console, inputting a series of commands. Jake's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" Zarya smiled faintly. "Setting a trap." The Draconis ships dropped out of FTL in perfect formation. Plasma cannons charge, targeting the Iron Fang. Jake's heart hammered. "Zarya." The Iron Fang vanished. A split second later, the ship reappeared behind the Draconis formation. "Fire!" Zarya shouted. The Iron Fang's cannons erupted. Plasma bolts tore through the nearest Draconis ship's engines. The enemy vessel spun out of control, crashing into its wingmate. "Two down," the tactical officer shouted. Jake's hand tightened on the armrest. "Finish them." The Iron Fang's cannons flared again. The remaining Draconis ships erupted in a shower of flame and debris. Jake exhaled slowly. "Status: all targets destroyed," the tactical officer said. Jake's gaze flicked toward Zarya. "Not bad, Princess." Zarya's eyes glinted. "You're welcome, Captain." Jake Hunter stood on the bridge of the Iron Fang, his hands resting on the metal rail as the stars outside blurred into long streaks of light. The ship was moving at maximum FTL speed, but it wasn't enough. Not this time. Zarya stood beside him, her violet eyes locked on the tactical display. Zalvar was sitting on the floor, his hands still bound, a dark smile playing on his lips. "They're catching up," Zarya said quietly. Jake's gaze sharpened. "How many?" 6 Draconis warships, the tactical officer replied. "And more on the way." Jake's jaw tightened. They'd destroyed the first wave. But the Draconis Empire wasn't going to stop until Zarya was either captured or dead. Jake had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This was suicide. "We can't outrun them," Zarya said. "Not anymore." Jake's gaze flicked toward her. "Then we make a stand." Zarya's eyes widened. "Jake, we have no choice." Zalvar's cold laugh filled the room. How noble, a human throwing his life away for an alien. Jake's gun was in his hand before Zalvar could blink. "Careful, Prince. I'm not in the mood." Zalvar's smile widened. "Of course not." The tactical display flickered. Red markers began to multiply across the screen. "They're forming a blockade," the tactical officer said. "We're boxed in." Jake's hand tightened on the rail. He turned toward Zarya. "Can you override their formation?" Zarya's fingers danced over the console. "They're running military encryption." "I need more time." "We don't have more time." The ship's alarm blared. The lights dimmed to crimson. "Incoming transmission," the comms officer said. Jake's jaw tightened. "Patch it through." The screen flashed to life, and a tall Draconis officer appeared. His reptilian features were cold and severe. His silver eyes narrowed as he studied Jake and Zarya. "Princess Zarya," the officer hissed, "it is over. Surrender now, and your crew will be spared." Jake's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you." The officer's gaze sharpened. "You are outnumbered, outgunned. Do you truly think you can win?" Jake's smile was cold. "I think you're afraid." The officer's jaw tightened. Jake leaned forward. "Come and get her." The transmission cut. Jake turned toward the crew. "Battle stations." The tactical officer's voice was tense. "Captain, if we engage them directly, we won't last more than 5 minutes." Jake's eyes darkened. "Then we'll make those 5 minutes count." Zarya's gaze locked with his. "Jake, I promised to protect you," Jake said. "And I'm not breaking that promise." The first Draconis warship dropped out of FTL with a flash of light. Plasma cannons lit up, firing a volley toward the Iron Fang. "Brace," Jake shouted. The ship rocked violently. Sparks exploded from the control panels. The crew scrambled to keep the systems stable. Jake's knuckles whitened on the rail. "Return fire." The Iron Fang's cannons roared. Plasma bolts ripped into the Draconis ship's hull. Armor peeled away, and secondary explosions erupted along its length. "Direct hit," the tactical officer shouted. Another warship dropped out of FTL. Then another. 3 ships inbound. Jake's heart hammered. "Hold the line." The Iron Fang banked hard to the left. Cannons flashed, tearing into the nearest warship's flank. "They're flanking us," Zarya shouted. Jake's mind raced. "Redirect all power to forward shields." Zarya's hands flew over the controls. Shields at 60%. The ship rocked violently as another plasma volley struck the hull. "Damage to the starboard side," the tactical officer shouted. "Hull integrity down to 40%. Jake's eyes narrowed. "Target their engines." The Iron Fang's cannons pulsed. Plasma bolts slammed into the nearest warship's engines. Flames erupted from the hull. The Draconis ship spun out of control, colliding with its wingmate in a brilliant explosion. "2 down," the tactical officer shouted. Jake's breath burned in his chest. He turned toward Zarya. "How much time do you need?" Zarya's eyes narrowed. "A minute. Maybe 2. Jake's eyes hardened. "We don't have 2 minutes." Another warship dropped out of FTL. "They're locking weapons." Jake's jaw tightened. "We need more firepower." Zarya's gaze sharpened. "There's another option." Jake's eyes narrowed. "What?" Zarya's hands hovered over the controls. "If I overload the reactor, we can direct the excess energy into the main cannon." Jake's gaze darkened. "That could kill us." Zarya's eyes gleamed. "It'll kill them first." Jake's hand settled on her shoulder. "Do it." Zarya's fingers flew over the controls. The ship's lights flickered. The hum of the engines deepened into a dangerous growl. "Reactor overload in 30 seconds," Zarya said. Jake turned toward the crew. "Prepare for impact." The nearest warship fired. Plasma bolts tore into the Iron Fang's hull. Sparks erupted from the ceiling. The ship shuddered violently. "Hull breach on deck 5. 10 seconds," Zarya shouted. Jake's gaze burned. "Fire everything." The Iron Fang's cannons erupted. Blue-white plasma bolts tore through the enemy ships. The nearest warship's hull splintered apart. Flames and debris scattered through the void. "3 down," the tactical officer shouted. "More incoming." Zarya's eyes flashed. "Now." Jake's fist slammed down on the fire control. A brilliant pulse of energy erupted from the Iron Fang's main cannon. The beam tore through the Draconis formation like a knife through paper. Ships exploded in rapid succession, their hulls shattering beneath the energy wave. Silence fell. Jake's breath burned in his chest. "Status." The tactical officer's voice was stunned. All enemy vessels destroyed. Jake's gaze flicked toward Zarya. You okay? Zarya's breath was shaky. Yeah. Jake turned toward Zalvar. Looks like you were wrong. Zalvar's smile was thin. Was I? Jake's eyes narrowed. You were betting they'd win. Zalvar's smile sharpened. And yet, here you are. Jake's gaze darkened. You'd better hope you stay useful. Zarya's eyes gleamed beneath the dim light. Captain Hunter. Jake's gaze flicked toward her. Yeah. Zarya's lips curled into a faint smile. We're not done yet. Jake's eyes hardened. No, we're not. Jake Hunter stood on the bridge of the Iron Fang, his hands gripping the cold metal rail as the view outside the viewport showed the wreckage of the Draconis fleet. Jagged pieces of twisted metal and debris floated through the dark void, illuminated by the pale light of distant stars. Smoke and the acrid scent of burning circuits filled the air. The ship's emergency lights bathed the bridge in a dim red glow. The crew was silent, the weight of the battle still hanging heavy in the air. Zarya stood beside Jake, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Her dark silver hair was disheveled, a small cut visible above her right eyebrow. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, her gaze was sharp. We survived, she said softly. Jake's jaw tightened. Barely. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Zalvar approached, his hands still bound in magnetic cuffs. His dark, predatory eyes scanned the damage with unsettling calm. I have to admit, Zalvar said, his voice smooth and cold, I didn't think you'd survive. Jake's eyes narrowed. You don't sound disappointed. Zalvar's lips curled into a thin smile. Perhaps I'm impressed. Jake's hand hovered near his sidearm. Don't push your luck. A crackling sound filled the bridge as the ship's comm system sputtered to life. The tactical officer's voice was tense. Captain, we have a problem. Jake's gaze sharpened. What is it? Multiple ships inbound. Jump signatures. Draconis. Jake's blood went cold. How many? The officer's voice was grim. A full fleet. Jake's mind raced. The Iron Fang was barely holding together. The ship's shields were depleted, and the weapons were offline for recalibration. They couldn't fight another battle. Not now. They must have sent reinforcements as soon as the first wave failed, Zarya said. Jake's gaze hardened. How long until they arrive? 2 minutes, the officer said. Jake's eyes darkened. Battle stations. The crew scrambled to their positions. The hum of the damaged engines deepened as power rerouted to the emergency systems. The tactical display lit up as red markers swarmed toward them. Zarya's gaze sharpened. Jake, we can't win this. Jake's jaw clenched. We don't need to win. Zarya frowned. What are you thinking? Jake's gaze flicked toward Zalvar. Your ship is still intact, isn't it? Zalvar's smile was thin. You want to use my ship? Jake's eyes narrowed. It's got cloaking technology. You can get Zarya out of here. Zarya's eyes widened. No. Jake turned toward her. You're the target. If you escape, they have no reason to keep chasing us. And what about you? Zarya's voice was sharp. Jake's gaze softened. I'll buy you time. No. Zarya's hand gripped his arm. I'm not leaving you. Jake's hand settled over hers. I promised I'd protect you. Zarya's eyes flashed. Then come with me. Jake's gaze hardened. I can't. Someone has to hold them off. The sound of alarms blared through the ship. The tactical officer's voice cut through the noise. Ships dropping out of FTL. Jake's gaze flicked toward Zalvar. Get her out of here. Zalvar's smile darkened. And why would I help you? Jake's gun was in his hand before Zalvar could blink. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you die first. Zalvar's smile thinned. Very well. Zarya's hand tightened on Jake's arm. Jake. Jake's gaze softened. Go. Zalvar gestured toward the side corridor. Zarya's violet eyes burned with fury. "I'm coming back for you." Jake's smile was thin. "You'd better." Zarya hesitated. Then she leaned in and pressed her forehead to his. Jake's breath caught as her warmth lingered against his skin. Then Zarya stepped away, following Zalvar down the corridor. Jake's gaze hardened. "Seal the hangar bay once they're clear." The tactical officer's voice was tense. "Captain, they've locked weapons." Jake's eyes darkened. "Open a channel." The screen flickered, and the face of a Draconis warlord appeared. His scales were black, his silver eyes glinting with predatory amusement. "Human," the warlord hissed. "You have fought well. Surrender now, and you may yet live." Jake's smile was cold. "Not happening." The warlord's eyes narrowed. "Then you will die." The transmission cut. The tactical officer's voice was sharp. "Incoming fire." The ship rocked violently. Sparks erupted from the consoles. Flames licked at the edges of the control panels. "Hull breach on Deck 3. Jake's hand tightened on the rail. His voice was sharp. "Target their lid ship. Captain, weapons are offline." Jake's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked toward the engine readout. Then his eyes darkened. "Redirect all remaining power to the engines." "Captain." Jake's gaze sharpened. "We're ramming them." The crew's eyes widened. "Jake." Zarya's voice crackled through the comms. Jake's gaze softened. "Get clear." The Iron Fang's engine screamed as the ship accelerated. The Draconis warships fired, plasma bolts tearing through the hull. But Jake's focus remained steady. The lead warship loomed ahead. Jake's hand hovered over the manual control. His breath was steady. His pulse pounded in his ears. "Captain." Jake's hand slammed down on the control. The Iron Fang surged forward. The hull of the Draconis ship loomed large in the viewport. Jake's breath caught. A brilliant flash of light erupted across the stars. The Iron Fang smashed into the Draconis ship's hull. Metal buckled and splintered. The explosion tore through the Draconis formation in a wave of fire and debris. Silence fell. Jake's head throbbed as his vision swam. Smoke filled the bridge. Alarms blared distantly. His breath burned in his chest. "Captain." Zarya's voice. Jake's gaze flicked toward the viewport. The wreckage of the Draconis fleet drifted through the void. His smile was faint. "Jake." Jake's gaze flicked toward the comm panel. Zarya's face appeared, her eyes bright with relief. "You're alive." Jake's breath was ragged. "Barely." Zarya's gaze softened. "You did it." Jake's smile was faint. "Told you I'd buy you time." The comm officer's voice was stunned. "Captain, the Draconis fleet is retreating." Jake's gaze darkened. "Good." Zarya's smile was soft. "Jake." Jake's head leaned back against the chair. His breath was steady. His gaze softened as Zarya's face filled the screen. "We won." Jake's smile deepened. "Humanity always wins."